Episode 215, Back to the Future. This is the World Organic News for the week ending the 25th of May 2020. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Once again, we've been spending the weekend planting garlic here in Highclere, and so we really haven't had time to do justice to an episode in the usual style. So here's one from the Real Food Chain, which I used to co-host with my friend Rich Bowden, and this one's a discussion on where we were going and what direction we were looking at just prior to moving on to the current property from way back in December 2018, which feels like a whole other lifetime ago. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and normal services will resume next week.
Hello and welcome to episode 4, season 5 of The Real Food Chain. I'm your host, Rich Bowden, coming to you from the central west of New South Wales, and I'm joined as always by my friend, author and podcaster at World Organic News, John Moore.
Hello, one and all.
And John, I gather that your worldly wanderings for your good lady Annie and yourself are close to an end, with a permanent move to northwestern Tasmanian farm now imminent, and that sort of depends on a successful settlement, is that correct?
Yeah, by the time this episode hits the feed, we'll be on the road to Highclere and some sort of permanence, which is always nice.
Fantastic.
Yeah, somewhere to put the roots down.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And you showed me some pictures of the farm, and it looks really nice. Not a big farm, but it's got everything you need. Is that right? Pretty
much, yeah. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to fit everything on, but enjoy the challenge, and we'll find ways around it. There's always a way. We'll document it, of course, so everyone else knows when we bugger up and when we get it right, so people can learn from it.
All a learning curve.
Yeah.
The very best of luck to you and Annie for the next stage of life. And I wonder if you would mind sharing with us, John, just a little bit more about how you see the farm fit in with the regenerative farming practices you've been writing, podcasting and practicing now for many years.
Okay, well, there'll be a series of experimental plantings, probably on about 1/10 of an acre plots, as well as our food and so on, and the things I'll be growing for sale.
Yep.
I've planted Fukuoka grain gardens in the past, but this time I'll be documenting and photographing and so on, so that people can see what happens with one of those, and I'll be doing demonstration gardens like the Three Sisters, which is a bit of a hoot. Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing, and anything people would like me to have a crack at, basically. I'm happy to give a whirl to. It's all about getting the soil healthy, and focusing on the soil, and the more we do that, the easier all the other stuff becomes.
So when you say by request, is that people can contact you and said they'd like you to grow certain types of food, is that right?
Yeah, I'm happy to try things. I try things anyway, and the experimentation will all be on the blog at World Organic News.
Yeah.
And turn up in the podcast, of course, every Monday.
Yep.
Australian time at about 9:30, sometimes a bit earlier, sometimes a bit later, depending on the season. Mm-hmm. And the joys of the technology.
Yep.
You just never know when the power's going to go out when you're out of town. So
yeah, I'm looking for
it happens, but we're looking for perhaps a change of government and a subsidy payment for a battery to go with the solar panels. So we'll see what happens.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? That all sounds really good, John. Looking forward to the coverage. Just wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about Fukuoka Grain Gardens, the concept, and also how you expect this to work in a Tassie climate zone.
Okay, well, Fukuoka was Japanese, obviously, and developed this process I'll talk about in a minute, but he's applied it across pretty much all continents that are permanently inhabited, so everything except Antarctica. Mm-hmm. And it relies on the fact that the winter grasses die off in spring, the summer grasses grow up, replace them, and then they die off in autumn and so on. So basically he set up a succession where he would grow rice inside a bed of white clover to get it started, flood it off, kill off the white clover, and then drain it and let the rice do its thing. And a couple of weeks before that was due for harvest, he'd oversow it with seed balls, little balls of clay full of seed. Of a winter grain, normally millet or barley or something like that. Harvest the rice, and by the time he'd done that, the barley or millet had started to grow. And then he'd toss all the straw and the the threshings and whatnot, everything but the grain back onto the paddock, onto the field he was growing in. Let the barley grow up, run ducks over it, get it to tiller and put up more sprouts, and then leave it alone and repeat the process in the next change of season. And everything goes back on except the grain. So he was able to grow soil over 20 years of 3 or 4 metres or something ridiculous. So I thought I've done it before, but this was long ago, back in the 90s, pre-internet days, of course. So, and I was doing it for myself rather than thinking anyone else would be interested. Mm-hmm. But I'll be recording it now and keeping a diary of it. We'll see how it goes and how productive it is and what the soil looks like before and after and during and all that sort of stuff.
Has anyone documented Fukuoka green gardens under cool climate conditions as you'll have in Tasmania?
Look, I'm not sure. I can't recall anyone off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been done.
Yeah.
There is an American fella who does a lot of the Fukuoka stuff who worked with him in these later years in Japan and then went back to the States to spread the word. But I'm not sure. So we'll see how it goes. We may well be a first, but I doubt it. But we'll see.
We'll keep listeners posted for the latest on that. All right, thanks for that, John. Look, you'll be joining a whole bunch of farmers, big and small, who are moving to Tassie, and I think they're taking advantage of the cooler climate and the relative availability of water in the state, comparing that to drought-stricken parts of the mainland. I grew up, as I think I said, John, in the south of the island, and my recollections of rare travels to the north are quite hazy, but I do recall it as being very picturesque, very green, very clean, and, of course, closer to the mainland than we were in the south, so that was something to be jealous about. But it did seem to be very nice farming country. And, as I say, all the very best on behalf of Carol and myself and all the Real Food Chain listeners. And we look forward to the blog, the podcast, and perhaps even a mini-series.
Who's to know? I mean, we might have a YouTube mini-series.
Fantastic.
That's the trouble, of course. There's too many ideas, but we'll get there.
Great. Okay, after the quick break, we'll be back to talk about John's fascinating latest podcast episode about evolution and gardening and farming, and also a sneak preview of our sister episode, Permaculture Plus, which will hit your podcatchers on the 15th of December. Interested in permaculture? Or to be more precise, are you interested in how permaculture can improve aspects of your everyday life? Co-hosts Rich Bowden and John Moore invite you to listen to Permaculture Plus to find this out for yourselves. And a hint, it's more than just growing things. That's Permaculture Plus in your podcaster feed of choice on the 15th of every month.
Hi, I'm John Moore, producer of the World Organic News podcast. I report on stories and ideas that fit with the show's catchphrase, decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. So I cover everything from alternative energy to regenerative agriculture. A new episode releases each Monday morning, and the show is approaching the end of its 3rd year. So please, join me and together we can change the world.
And speaking of World Organic News, John, as we were before the break, I listened to a fascinating and informative episode of yours titled Evolution, Gardening, Farming and Decisions. Now, it certainly filled in a number of gaps in my knowledge. I wonder if you could briefly discuss the topic, especially the relationship between evolution and the food we eat today.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so a lot of people misunderstand evolution. You hear things like plants got bigger after they were domesticated. Well, the plants didn't decide to get bigger. There was a selective pressure put on the grains by humans for wheat plants that produce more seed and things like that. And so even whenever you see a change in population profile, it's because something in the environment's changed. I think the example I used in the podcast was the movement of cane toads into the Northern Territory. There were people saying the lizards and snakes have decided to have smaller mouths now that the cane toads are there, so they can't eat them. Whereas what actually happened was that part of the population that had small mouths and therefore couldn't die from cane toad poisoning were the ones that survived and reproduced. Now, the thing with changes, and there's a fair bit of climate change going on at the moment, as I think we're all fairly aware, the best defence against this sort of thing is a wide gene pool. So if those lizards and snakes and whatnot in the Northern Territory didn't have a part of their population that had small mouths, then they'd just all be wiped out. So what we need is cultivars with wide genetic variety so that we get some return in a wet year, some in a dry year, some that can come to harvest into a cool, damp autumn, that sort of thing. The best way to do that I've found is to use open pollinated seeds. Hybrid seeds are great if you get the conditions that they were bred for. Now, most of the hybrid seeds are also being bred so that you need to add artificial fertilisers, and of course when you toss in the GM selections, those plants need everything to be drenched in Roundup to kill off their competition, and it doesn't affect them. But if you've got a wide range, then you can't reuse the seed because they're so specialised the next generation doesn't throw true.
So it means you've got to buy the seeds from the dealers.
And the fertiliser and the pesticides and all the rest of it. It's a nice little earner for, it's good for shareholder value if you happen to be into that sort of thing. But if you're actually at the front line, the wider variation you've got within your plant genome, the better. I mean, you're not going to get quite as high a return as the hybridised varieties, but you will get a consistent return. And because your costs are low, you're not having to buy the pesticide or the herbicide, or the seeds for that matter, your costs are lower. You might from time to time buy in new seed just to add a bit more mix to your genetic stock, but you don't need to. And the open pollinated ones, as they're challenged each year, for want of a better phrase, by the environment, those that are fit for that area will evolve to reproduce in that area. So if you select your selection criteria on what you're looking for, so I grow some blue corn. And I was talking to a fella, he said, my dad used to grow corn, it used to go 12 feet high. So well, this one only goes to about 5 foot, but I get 3 or 4 corn cobs off each plant. I'm actually trying to grow the corn cobs rather than the plant itself. The plant, yeah. And so it depends on what it is you're selecting for, and if you don't write that down beforehand, you don't know what to pick at the end of the year for the right seeds to save. So it's a matter of... Of course, the other... Go on. Sorry, John, I was just going to say, of course, one of the examples of we were talking about hybrid seeds is tomatoes. And the tomatoes you get down supermarkets are almost tasteless, but they have been bred to travel long distances. They've got thick skins. Exactly. But they don't, they seem to have left the taste behind. And there may be some gardeners out there or farmers who grow their own heritage tomatoes. The first time I did that, the taste sensation was unbelievable. I just didn't think tomatoes could be like that. Yeah, it's a whole other world. But equally, they won't travel. So then you get the... Yes. Annie's got a wonderful recipe for tomato ketchup that she picked up in Ireland that people rave about. And I think that's as much to do with the recipe as it is to do with the right selection of tomatoes. Right, yeah. So it's a matter of deciding what it is you're selecting for to start with. Yeah. It comes back, it seems, John, to the permaculture principle of valuing diversity. Of course. So you were saying more about a wide range in the plant genome. Not a guarantee, but at least some sort of... it tilts the scales a bit more in your favour. Yes. In a drought, it doesn't matter how wide your gene pool is, nothing grows in a drought. Yeah. So extreme conditions, like asteroids wiping out dinosaurs or drought wiping out wheat fields, aren't going to help at all. That's with annuals and things we've been talking about. If you're going to plant perennials, and we're going to put in some crab apples and some quinces. Yeah. Because there's already apples and pears and things there. So the plan is to have fruit trees that come in early, mid-early, late early, mid, late mid, early late, mid-late and late, so that there's something flowering across 6 weeks, so that if you get a late frost or a wet spell that stops the bees or whatever, something will still flower and fruit. So it's a matter of being prepared for whatever might come. And in the good season where everything happens as the textbook says it should, we'll be in danger of drowning in food. But that's okay too. You can just build a bigger table. It's a nice problem to have. There are worse. There are worse. Yeah. And I believe we've got a special episode coming up on Permaculture Plus.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks, too, for the insight into evolution of food. That's fascinating stuff. And we'll have the link to that in the show notes. Yes, we do. We've got an interview with Liz Bastian. Liz Bastian, if you live in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, is a legend, a community organiser, a permaculturalist, a climate activist, and much, much more. And I was lucky enough to catch her for about half an hour. She told me that she'd just been up till about 3 o'clock in the morning fixing up video edits for this new community magazine that she's running, and she'd just come back from a council meeting. And she was kind enough to give me time. And it was a co-production with Mark Spencer's Climactic, so I was able to ask her questions about climate change and permaculture.
It's almost as if they're connected.
Indeed, I wonder what the connection is there. Well done, John. Nice pick-up.
But there is a connection between permaculture and the climate change.
There is indeed, yes. And that's one of the things that Liz was able to discuss, was talking about climate change, issues like climate change, through a permaculture perspective, and I hope to bring that to you on the 15th. She's running a fascinating grassroots media venture, John, called Big Fix. And she's running it for a few years now, but it's now grown into more than just a Facebook page. It has a hard copy, which is available around the Blue Mountains, and she also runs a website. From what she talks about is that she gives storytellers a go. She believes that media is part of the problem that we have in our society, and therefore looking at the solution as part of the problem, as taught by permaculture, she thought, well, okay, media needs to be at grassroots level, it needs to be non-profit, and it needs to focus on storytellers, not destructive elements. I won't tell you any more because she goes into that in quite a big detail, and it's fascinating. And I've just got a clip here, John, of Liz talking about how the traditional mainstream media methods actually moves people away from the focus of news.
Mm-hmm.
Change depends on people and groups of people. And if you present the media in sections like, entertainment, lifestyle, technology, news, it depersonalises it a little bit, and it doesn't highlight to people that everyone is responsible for change.
And the full episode will hit the feed on the 15th of December.
And one of the great parts of the interview was that Liz mentioned she believed the whole Big Fix project was entirely replicable to any community. I told her I'd love to see a version in the central west of New South Wales, where I am. But what about you in the northwestern farming community of Tassie, John?
Well, we'll see what's already up and running in the district when we get there. I've moved into different districts a couple of times in my life, and it's probably a good rule of thumb not to go in and say, you're doing it wrong, here's something special, especially if we add the phrase, and this is how we do it on the mainland. Quickest way to get lynched socially anyway. But yes. I like the idea of the Big Fix. We'll just see how we go. I'm going to focus on connecting with people in the community and doing the stuff on the farm.
Yeah.
But when the opportunity arises, I'm sure it'll turn up.
And yes, I'll be supplying you with a few seasoned Tassie descriptions of mainlanders as a moving in present, John.
Excellent.
And on that note, that's it for episode 4 of season 5 of The Real Food Chain. Thank you, John. Goodbye from me, Rich Bowden.
And goodbye from him, John Moore.